Congressman Jolly, 5 days to go. Trump is in a reliably blue state again. What do you make of these decisions?
You know, for the most part, I think all politics are national now. So in some ways, it doesn't matter where you go as long as your speech is being covered. But I don't understand why you go to a blue state unless it's just pure hubris or trolling the vice president, which is kind of what Republicans like to do today with their politics, is just kind of troll. Look, Donald Trump is wasting a day. I mean, it's clear he's wasting a day, because even if all politics are national, he could be giving this speech in Pennsylvania or a state that might actually matter. But look, Donald Trump's a historically bad candidate. I know it's odd to think of him as that as a former president. He is a historically bad candidate this cycle, and today affirms that.
He certainly is unconventional, for sure. Juanita, he was cosplaying for the second time this cycle, wearing that orange worker vest we showed in the video. He was driving around in a garbage truck at an event yesterday, trying to highlight Biden's recent garbage comments. But I wonder if it could backfire and risk reminding everyone of the racist joke related to garbage in Puerto Rico at his rally. Plus, he's said some other things like this lately.
The most corrupt, horrible people. These are horrible people. Oops, we should get along with everybody. They're horrible people. These are sick people, but we're not going to let this happen any longer. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to her. We're like a garbage can.
We got a lot of bad genes in our country right now.
So, Juanita, what's your take on this garbage truck stunt and the potential impact with undecided voters?
Look, Anna, the only other thing I'd add to that montage you just aired is enemies within applying to people who don't vote for him or disagree with him, because that is the frame and context in which his entire campaign has been run. So when he's in a costume, yet again, they've lost the plot, and they are behaving as though voters won't remember everything he said up until that point. So I don't think it's going to have a broad impact. I don't think there are any disaffected Democrats that his campaign is pointing to that are going to latch onto these statements. If anything, it's just going to continue to turn people off from his campaign. The other thing his campaign said about the reason why they're going to these non-battleground states is because they've built a diverse coalition. But Anna, I have to question what they mean by diverse when their campaign is built on sexism, racism, xenophobia, anti-women legislation, and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. So I have no idea what they mean. It's really and truly giving delusion, and that's why they're resorting to these stunts, which only appeal to the base of supporters he has not expanded in this entire race.
Congressman Jolly, Vice President Harris has this new Spanish language ad today that's targeting Puerto Rican voters in battleground states following all the backlash over that racist joke at Trump's rally. So many controversies have come and gone throughout this campaign and really throughout the duration of Trump's political career. Is it smart for the Harris campaign, do you think, to try and amplify this specific issue even after that truck stunt?
I think micro-targeting voters that are persuaded by the garbage comment that we heard at the rally is very important. And so I think you're seeing Vice President Harris do this with precision. Look, I think this entire race from start to finish is an adjudication of Donald Trump. Yes, many people are passionate about issues, certainly reproductive freedom. But Donald Trump almost is the incumbent in this race. This is an adjudication of Trumpism, of the vileness of it, of the anger, of the division, of the misogyny, all of those things that we often talk about. And I think why Vice President Harris is on message targeting Donald Trump is because the last available voters, persuadable voters, are either soft Republicans or independents who performed as Republicans in the past. Otherwise, every voter is just a turnout voter. But those who have yet to make up their mind are the voters who say, I just can't vote for Donald Trump. I know that. But can I vote for Vice President Harris? It's the closing argument she's making.
I want to highlight something that Democrats are pouncing on, some new Trump comments about women.
I said, why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not.
Whether they like it or not, Juanita, is that a winning message?
Anna, all that brought to mind was the reality that Donald Trump is someone who was found liable of sexual assault. He is also someone who appointed 3 Supreme Court justices to take away Roe v. Wade, which was the law of the land for decades. The reality is that Donald Trump is the threat to women. And I think this is smart for the Harris campaign to emphasize, because not only do they have the advantage when it comes to the gender gap with 12 to 15 points more support from women, but they have Trump's words and records to amplify. And I fully expect them to continue to do that in the coming days and months. It's just a question at this point of how many women turn out and how many women support Vice President Harris. I think about that in the context of Black women, Latino women, Asian American women, and Indigenous women largely voting for Democrats historically. But then I turn to white women. And this is who I think the vice president's campaign is attempting to appeal to, knowing that 47% of white women supported Trump in 2016 and 53% in 2020. And so how many white women are going to view his language of whether women like it or not as the final straw? Because let's be real, racism wasn't the final straw. His court cases from accusers of sexual assault have not been the final straw. Is this the final straw, especially now that Roe v. Wade is going to be a mobilizing factor in this election, where it appears on the ballot in 10 states, and where we have seen voters cross partisan lines and every demographic line you can think of to support protecting abortion rights? This is the question this election cycle, and this could be a determining factor.
Congressman, we heard those comments from the vice president at the top, her pitch to Gen Z voters. She was talking to students in Wisconsin. It's always a challenge for campaigns to get out the younger vote. Is her messaging focusing on freedoms, and specifically reproductive freedom, an effective way to motivate that voting bloc this time around?
I certainly think it is. And this is a hard group to break through, because as smart and educated as younger voters can be, they are relatively lower information, many of them as a demographic. And so that low information voter might be drawn to just being voting on the brand. Republican, Democrat, Independent, Donald Trump, what do I think of him? And so to hit home strong messages about democracy and personal freedoms, perhaps even student loans and an economy, an opportunity economy the vice president talks about, is great for young voters. Listen, Vice President Harris is really doing everything right now. Donald Trump is doing everything wrong. And I agree with Juanita. Fortunately, the women are going to decide this election. Black, Latino women, they're going to decide this election. And if you look at the trend line from 18 to 20 to 22, Democrats are overperforming because women are coming out and rejecting Donald Trump and Trumpism. I'd be worried if I was the former president going into next Tuesday.
Just 5 days left to go. There's been an army of surrogates fanning out across the country, both campaigns. On the Kamala Harris side, it's represented this remarkably broad coalition of voters, from progressives to business leaders to lifelong Republicans who are putting the Constitution and country over party, as Liz Cheney puts it. One of those surrogates who's been hitting the trail very hard is Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He helped kick off the Progressives for Harris group's launch call in August after the switch put Harris at the top of the ticket. In just the last few weeks alone, he's been campaigning across the country, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, even down in Texas. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont, joins me now. Senator, you've been out on the trail. You've spent decades talking to folks, talking to voters, know what campaigns are like. What's your general feeling about things right now?
Well, I wish I could give you some brilliant analysis, but I'm going to tell you what everybody else is saying. It's going to be a very, very close election. It's going to come down to small numbers of votes in a handful of states. But what I will tell you is, going to Pennsylvania, going to Wisconsin just a few days ago, there's a lot of energy on the ground. I was especially delighted in Pennsylvania to see hundreds and hundreds of trade unionists coming out in Erie, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They're going out, they're knocking on doors. They know what this election is about and why Trump has got to be defeated and Kamala has got to be elected. So a lot of energy on the ground, large meetings in Wisconsin, college campuses, Madison. We're making some progress.
Yeah, it's the point about trade unions is interesting. It sometimes feels that like Elon Musk was like conjured from the mind of Bernie Sanders to embody the billionaire class, like with his, using essentially Citizens United to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, the record that he's had virulently anti-union in the actual businesses he runs, particularly Tesla, the promises he's making. It seems to me, I wonder how much that's penetrating, but it does seem to me like if you have any question about which side the Trump campaign's on, Musk's presence is a pretty good indicator.
Well, Chris, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that has bothered me is we have not talked enough about in this campaign the unbelievable amount of money that billionaires are spending. In Trump's campaign, you got 3 billionaires who are spending combined hundreds of millions of dollars to elect Donald Trump as president. Democrats have their billionaires. But what we have got to deal with is the reality that we cannot allow this type of billionaire money to determine who the next president of the United States is. And the word has got to go out. Citizens United has got to go, in my view, public funding of elections.
One of those other billionaires, Miriam Adelson, who's the widow of the late Sheldon Adelson, casino magnate, also given, I think, about $100 million to Super PAC last. She's someone who cares very deeply about American policy towards Israel. She is very supportive of the right-wing Likud government in Netanyahu and the possible annexation in toto of the West Bank and right-wing Israeli politics. She's given Trump $100 million and clearly thinks she's going to get something from it. I think it's fair and rational to say. You put out a video the other day sort of addressing people in the Democratic coalition who are frustrated or upset at the Biden-Harris administration towards Israel regarding the Gaza war and explaining why you think it's so important to vote for Harris. Give me the version of that talk, particularly given the context that I think Miriam Adelson's probably got a good read on what you're going to get from a Trump presidency.
Well, look, the bottom line is there are many, many millions of Americans, including myself, who strongly disagree with Biden's and Harris's position on Gaza and their support of Netanyahu. I don't have to go into a great length now. I think viewers understand that what's going on in Gaza now is horrific in terms of the loss of life, the number of people injured, and now, because Israel is blocking humanitarian aid, we're looking at mass malnutrition of children and starvation. And they're going to make it even worse by not allowing UNRWA to provide humanitarian aid in Gaza. What I think is it's important for people to know, especially young people, that as wrong as Biden and Harris are on this issue, Trump is even worse. He is being supported by Mrs. Adelson, huge amounts of money, and she is rapidly pro-Netanyahu. We cannot even, this is really quite incredible, quite embarrassing, is that at a time when children are starving in Gaza, we could not get Republicans to even support humanitarian aid, feed hungry children. So the point of my video, which kind of blew me away, it's gotten over 15 million views right by now, is that, yeah, we disagree with Harris on this issue, but we have a much better chance. And I promise I will do everything that I can to move the administration to change their policies and not continue to provide financial aid or military aid, offensive aid to Netanyahu. But we have a much better chance of changing U.S. policy under Harris than certainly under Trump.
I've been thinking about a reference that I think you'll appreciate. I was not there for, but, the 68 campaign, people were very, very understandably and rightly enraged at Johnson and the Democratic Party over Vietnam. And Nixon, people forget this, but Nixon basically ran as the peace candidate in 68. And then immediately started bombing Cambodia in secret and caused the loss of life. I mean, that 68 weighs heavily because, believe me, it could get worse if the wrong person is elected president. And I think about that all the time.
Well, I think that's a good point. And let's understand that Netanyahu, who is a right-wing racist extremist prime minister in Israel, surely wants his good friend Donald Trump to be president of the United States. Two right-wing extremists working together. Yeah. So I think on this issue, again, even on this issue, Harris is going to be far superior to Trump, and we have a chance if millions of us get active on this issue to change U.S. policy in Gaza.
Senator Bernie Sanders has been crisscrossing the country talking to trade unionists and folks at college campuses and put that video out, 50 million views. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Joining us now from Nevada is the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Great to be here, Lawrence. Thank you so much.
So you have been speaking on the campaign trail, also knocking on doors, sometimes, I think today maybe knocking on doors. What has surprised you the most when you meet people out there in the campaign trail, especially when you go up to knock on a door?
You know, you're never sure what you're going to get, and what you're seeing is the passion, the enthusiasm, but also the emotion, and people are really getting what the policies that she's talking about are going to mean to them. Just today, I met a veteran who was literally in tears, thinking about what would happen to him and his life if his benefits were taken away, Social Security, Medicare, veterans benefits. Got very emotional. And he's going out there knocking on doors himself, trying to get his community here in Las Vegas to get behind Kamala Harris. I had a Republican actually run out their door. I hadn't even knocked on that door and just said, hey, I'm a Republican voting for Kamala Harris. You know, I'm choosing country over party, which is the message that we're getting out there. I spoke to another young woman, Puerto Rican descent, was so outraged by what had gone on at that rally. And she said the future starts on November 5th. And so the message is getting out there. People not only can see Kamala Harris as president, but listening to what she's saying, the words that are uniting us, being a president for everyone, you're really feeling it on the ground, not only here in Nevada, but I've been, Lawrence, traveling for almost 15 straight weeks, and it's the same thing everywhere I go.
Yeah, in those 15 straight weeks, the Vice President of the United States has given the most important speech of her life a few times. The next one always becomes the most important one, as we saw this week at the Ellipse. And at the end of that speech, when she delivered what clearly was, at that point, the most important speech of her life, and probably will remain so. It's probably unlikely there'll be a bigger one than that before the end of the campaign. The very first voice she hears is your voice. You are that first person after those giant moments in her life. What did you say to her when you got out there on the stage with her after that speech?
I looked her in the eyes, not only as her husband, but also as a proud American who just felt like I was seeing the President of the United States. I just looked her in the eyes and I said, I am so proud of you and I love you so much. And it was, again, as you said, Lawrence, every single time that she's needed to step up, she's exceeded incredibly high expectations, whether it was, the launch in July, whether it was her DNC speech, whether it was the debate against Donald Trump, and now. And she's just kept doing it the entire time. And again, my pride for her is not only as a husband, but also as someone who loves this country and wants a president that we can look up to, somebody who can be a president for all of us, and somebody that the world can respect up on the world stage. And I think that speech on the Ellipse, it just took the stain of January 6th right out of there. And up there you saw her as president. You can just see it, the way she looked, the way she sounded, and that is what I'm seeing out here in these final days of this campaign.
I would also observe that you are offering America, especially young men in America, a moment on that stage in particular after that speech that I think could be very important to them in the age of Trump, and that is the model of a man demonstrating how to support the women in his life, the woman in his life. And even the way you feature her as you walk off that stage, you're trying to step out of the frame almost and say to the audience it's about her.
Well, look, I love her very much, and sometimes when I get asked questions like this, I'm a little surprised, because I think it's kind of the height of being a man is to support those you love, including your wife. And so for me, it's very natural. This is what I do, but she supports me just the same way I support her. And I had a great career, as you know, Lawrence. You've talked about it, and I miss it at times. But to be able to step away to support her as vice president, and now hopefully as our next president, I do it gladly, without any bitterness or anger. And then she's there for me. And as second gentleman, I've been able to lean into this role for 4 years, just as I expect to lean into the role as the first gentleman.
Well, your wife, the vice president, has had to help you, obviously, in a role that no man in history has ever played before. How has she helped you in this unique role in the White House as second gentleman?
Immensely. When I had to step away from my career, when she got tapped by Joe Biden to be on the ticket in August of 2020, I didn't realize that was the last day I practiced law. So when they took office, at first it was a little bit of a struggle, frankly, to figure out what I would do, what my role would be. But it was Kamala Harris who was the one who pushed me into issues like fighting anti-Semitism and hate. I'm the first Jewish person ever to be a White House principal. That was really her up until this very day, continuing to push me out in the face of so much hate and anti-Semitism to use that platform to speak out. And on the issues of gender equity, especially after the horrific Dobbs decision, I've been out there front and center advocating for women's rights and reproductive freedom and freedom writ large, because that issue affects all of us, not just women. And she's the one who's pushed me out there to do it. And also things that I didn't think I would be able to do on the ceremonial side. She said, just lean into it and have fun. That's part of the job too. And I've done that gladly, and I'll do that as first gentleman.
The one thing you had going for you is no man had ever done it better before. So you had that standard. I want to ask you about Monday. You gave a very important speech against anti-Semitism, and particularly citing the hatred, racism, and anti-Semitism that was present at the Madison Square Garden Trump rally. And I just want to read for the audience who didn't take in all of that, just one statement that was made from that microphone saying the whole effing party, meaning the entire Democratic Party, this is not Trump speaking, it's one of his speakers, a bunch of degenerates, lowlives, Jew haters, and lowlives, every one of them, every one of them. And that means the vice president, and it means you.
It's outrageous, it's disgusting, and it's just inappropriate. And anyone who wants to be president of the United States and does not condemn that, which I'm sure Trump did not, is unfit to be president of the United States, period. Full stop. And this is just yet more of the gaslighting and the lies and the disinformation, this, like I've been calling this Trumpian fog, to distract the American people from what's right in front of their face. Again, you've got somebody in Trump who had the job, was terrible, degrading before our very eyes, unfit for any job, let alone president of the United States. And you have Kamala Harris, who was ready to be president, commander-in-chief on day one, will never denigrate her fellow citizens. She has said this repeatedly. She's going to be president for all of us, whether you voted for her or not, and she means it.
Also, in your speech on Monday, you said, referring to the quotes that we've learned from John Kelly, Donald Trump's White House chief of staff, he looks at Adolf Hitler's generals and sees something to admire. Let that sink in. You said that to a Jewish audience. When you let it sink in, when you hear John Kelly on tape quoting Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump said, quote, Hitler did some good things, when you let that sink in, how do you feel?
Well, all of us should feel the same way. We should all be chilled to the bone that somebody who was president of the United States was saying these things behind closed doors to an esteemed four-star general in General Kelly. That should chill every single American to the core, that this man seeks the office once again. And it's not just General Kelly, you heard what General Milley said, calling him a fascist to the core. I mean, this is who he is. So again, people, we can't fall for the gaslighting, the disinformation, misinformation. Please look what is right in front of your eyes. Somebody, again, we cannot have a president who admires Adolf Hitler. We just can't. We need to move forward. We need to turn the page, and we have somebody in Kamala Harris who's going to be there for all of us, will never let us down, is someone we can look up to, who we'll be proud of.
We just have time for one more question, and that is, how do you feel when Donald Trump attacks your wife personally? I don't mean politically. I don't mean about policy. I mean when he attacks your wife's intelligence, when he talks about your wife's race, when Donald Trump says these very specific, insulting things about your wife. When that sinks in, how do you feel?
Well, as a husband, it pisses me off, but as a first gentleman, someone who hopes to be the first gentleman married to the next president of the United States, we cannot be distracted by it. So no matter how I feel about it as her husband, I've got to put it to the side so we don't get distracted. So we focus on this mission of getting her elected, and that's what we've done for these 14 and a half weeks. That's what we're going to do for these next 4 or 5 days, because we know how important this election is, and we put everything we had into this. Our family has put everything into this, and like she's been there for me and my family, she's going to be there for you and your family, so we're not going to let anything get in our way. This is the only thing we talk about. This is the only thing we focus on. Our happy couple time will wait until after the election, and we're not going to let anything stop her from getting the truth out there and making sure that she is elected as the next president.
Second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, thank you so much for making the time for us tonight.
Great to see you, Lawrence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen, Donald Trump's not done. Did anybody hear what he had to say just yesterday? And I'll tell you, it was outrageous. So he said, on the issue of freedom of choice, reproductive freedom, he said that he will do what he wants because, quote, this is his perspective, he will do it whether the women like it or not. Whether the women like it or not. Can you imagine? We have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. We're done with that.
Later tonight, Vice President Harris holds another rally in Nevada, this one in Las Vegas, where she will be joined by Jennifer Lopez. Joining us now, John Ralston, CEO of the Nevada Independent, and Maya Rupert, a Democratic political strategist who served in senior roles on the Elizabeth Warren and the Julian Castro presidential campaigns. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us tonight. Maya, let's just lean into this again. Donald Trump's weird thing that he keeps on talking about how he's going to protect women. Now he says whether they want it or not. If I were Donald Trump, I would not sort of talk about doing things to or for women, whether they wanted to or not. But it's, regardless of his phrasing and his framing of it, it's just not true.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think that when we have moments like this, when we see Donald Trump sort of taking some of these positions where it doesn't make sense, he's sort of speaking nonsense. Very clearly what is happening is he is being told that he has a problem with women. He needs to try to appeal to women, but he doesn't have anything to say. His policies are disastrous for women. He has an incredibly backwards view of gender. Project 2025 is absolutely catastrophic for issues that impact women. And so what he's going to do is make these off-the-wall claims that don't mean anything. And the reason they don't mean anything is that he doesn't have anything real to say.
John, let's talk about Nevada. Nevada could become truly one of the most important states in this election, particularly if, for some reason, Kamala Harris struggles in the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If she loses any one of those, Nevada becomes quite central to the decision making here. Tell me about the early vote. There's a discussion about the fact that statewide GOP early votes exceed Democratic votes But how is someone like me supposed to think about that? Does it mean something other than the fact that you've got a presidential campaign who's not actually campaigning against early voting?
Yeah, well, they've changed, Ali. You're absolutely right. You remember back in 2020, Trump was telling Republicans, don't mail in your votes, don't early vote.
Yep.
But they changed. They suddenly woke up and realized what a terrible strategy that was. So they front-loaded their vote. So for the first time in about 5 presidential cycles, Ali, you have the Republicans banking votes instead of the Democrats. And there are some Democrats who were concerned about that, but Nevada's voting has changed. You know, Ali, with the Democrats have won the presidential race here 4 cycles in a row. It's been 20 years since the Republicans have won, but things have changed a lot. We're now a state where mail ballots are very important, and there's still a lot of mail ballots out there, and Democrats dominate in mail ballots. So I wouldn't say that Nevada is definitely going in to the Republican column, but the Democrats have to hope that a lot more mail ballots. And one other thing, if I might, Ali, there's a lot more independent voters now in Nevada. The demographics have changed. They're the plurality. The Democrats think the majority are going for them. They're going to end up being about 28, 29% of the vote, maybe even 30% of the vote. So it's far from over in Nevada, but the Republicans definitely have an advantage right now.
Chris Hayes was just having a conversation with Bernie Sanders. There are a number of people who are trying to address this issue of disaffected Democratic voters, voters who are sort of dissatisfied, might be sitting on their hands, might be part of the uncommitted movement, might be frustrated about the Harris-Biden position on Israel-Gaza. And a number of them are making the argument that, as Bernie Sanders has, who said, I don't agree with Biden or Harris on this issue, but I agree with them more than I agree with Trump. Things can get worse under Trump, and we will not have certain fights to fight if you decide to sit this one out. What's the best argument for either progressives or people who are still considering sitting this election out?
I think there are 2 very strong arguments. One, I think, on the issues that people are concerned about and expressing concern about. I think what people need to remember is that you never know. When you elect a president, you never know what that person is going to be faced with. You have to deal with how you've seen them sort of confront issues, what their temperament is, and how they listen to people. I think we have already seen with Kamala Harris that she has listened to the progressive movement, the uncommitted voters, the people who are saying, I don't like our policy in Gaza. I think that impulse, that instinct to listen, that instinct to say, I can learn something new and change my mind, that's what we have to vote on, right? We never know what the situation the person faces actually will be. But if we vote for someone whose temperament we trust, that's what we're getting. And there's a stark difference with the way that Kamala Harris has approached issues where people disagree with her and the way Donald Trump approaches issues where people disagree with him. And I think it's a very, very clear choice.
John, let me ask you about Elon Musk. From his posts on X, you would get the impression that he's fully running the ground game in several states, the get out the vote game in several states, including in Nevada. Of course, Nevada is noted for that historic Harry Reid ground get out the vote operation. Talk to me about what's actually happening on the ground in Nevada, because again, the impression you get if you're following Elon Musk's posts are that they have mastered the ground game in Nevada, and that is going to change everything.
Well, Elon Musk may know how to build a great electric vehicle, and he may know eventually, Ali, how to get to Mars, but he knows nothing about getting out the vote. And as you mentioned, the Harry Reid machine is formidable. It's why the Democrats have won every presidential race here since 2008. But the demographics have changed, and Elon Musk, if he has nothing else, he has a lot of money, and he has hired some good operatives, including a guy who used to work for the Trump campaign, a guy by the name of Chris Carr, who helped the governor the Republican governor win a close race here in 2022. But you can't direct this stuff overnight, Ali. It takes a long time to build a get-out-the-vote infrastructure to register voters and then make sure they get them to the polls. The Democrats have some inherent advantages always over the Republicans, not just the Reid machine, but having unions who are part of that machine and nonprofits who are out there in the various minority communities recruiting people to register and then get out the vote. So if it were a fair fight, I'd take the Reid machine over Elon Musk, and of course Charlie Kirk was also part of this. But the problem is for the Democrats is the demographics have changed, Ali, since Barack Obama won the state by fairly large margins, and then Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden only won by 2.5 points, and now the registration is very close. So they're concerned, and no matter what Elon Musk is doing or not doing, this is probably going to be a close race.
Maya, depending on who you're talking to, reproductive rights might be the biggest thing this issue. Immigration might be the biggest thing this issue. But across the board, the economy continues to be the biggest issue, almost always is in every election. Even the Wall Street Journal today has said that the next president will inherit a remarkable economy. A number of Nobel Prize-winning economists have come out and talked about Harris's economy. And frankly, as a guy who studies this on a regular basis, it's a strong economy. Is there something about that message that's not fully resonating? Because if people are economy voters, your choice is a little bit clearer, unless you are a billionaire, in fact, in which case you should vote for Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. No, I mean, I think there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect. People say that they are voting on the economy. They want answers on the economy. We have a strong economy right now under the Biden-Harris administration. And Harris has put out plans for how she will continue to help poor and working families pay for things. Donald Trump has put out plans that have been blasted by economists, regardless of political affiliation, because they are going to be just catastrophic for working families. And so, again, there does seem to be, people are saying they want to vote on an issue where it seems like there would only be one clear choice. But again, I mean, I think that this is one of those situations where people, people are being asked about something. They're not necessarily going to go to a website. They're not necessarily going to sort of listen, read a plan. What they need is for people to make it plain. And that's what these next few days are about, which is why it's so interesting that Donald Trump seems to have given up the ghost on talking to new voters, bringing people over, while Harris is out there making her affirmative case. He seems to have been taking the tack that he's only going to speak to the base. And I think that we're going to see those differences really play out over these next few days.
One of the things you're seeing very clearly in Nevada, John, is what the effect of the anti-immigrant sentiment that the Trump campaign has been talking about. Some of it's specifically anti-Latino and Hispanic, but some of it's not. Some of it's anti-Haitian, whatever it happens to be. Is that manifesting? Are you hearing or seeing how that's manifesting among particularly immigrant voters or voters who are descendant of immigrants?
Well, as you know, Ali, even though we're not a border state, immigration has been an issue going back many, many cycles here, because Nevada has a very high undocumented worker population and a very big Hispanic population. It can be as much as 20% of the electorate. And it's been well documented over the last few cycles that they have become more skeptical of the Democratic Party. And I don't want to suggest that the Latino vote is monolithic, but parts of the Latino vote have become skeptical. And in Nevada, remember, a lot of these are service workers in the culinary union. They were disproportionately crushed here in the economy by COVID. And even though we have recovered, Ali, there's still some people who are suffering. A lot of them are Latino. And while some of the polling shows that they are drifting away, at least enough to maybe put Trump over the top here, there is a sense among the Democrats that Hispanics here generally make up their minds later than other voters, and that they can still be coaxed into the Democratic camp. That's what happened in 2022 when the first Latina ever elected to the U.S. Senate, Catherine Cortez Masto, was seen lagging with Latinos, but exit polls eventually showed her getting to 60%. Harris needs to get to 60%, Ali.
50 past the hour, former President Trump has made an issue of what he calls fighting the deep state, slamming some of his former national security officials even. Here's some of what he had to say just yesterday.
I just saw General Kellogg, wherever he may be backstage. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Look at that general. He's a real general, not like Milley. Not like Billy. Not like Kelly Low. He's a low IQ guy. But this is a real general. He's great.
Earlier this month, hundreds of Trump's former national security officials, including UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, signed a letter endorsing him, but hundreds and hundreds of other current and former national security officials, including former secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, signed a letter in support of Vice President Harris. Emmy Award-winning actor Mandy Patinkin, who played the CIA director in the TV series Homeland, and his son Gideon, interviewed some of those national security officials for a series of videos he's been posting online.
For 8 years, I played the director of the CIA on this show called Homeland. I was the fake version of these real people. Hey, how are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. These folks know what they're talking about. They have worked under several administrations. Many have supported and even worked for Republican presidents in the past. And they feel the urgency to get Kamala Harris elected because she is abundantly qualified and because Trump would be a true disaster.
Thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with Mandy Patinkin. Mandy, thank you for being with us this morning. What made you decide to speak with some of these national security officials?
We went to the DNC with my son Gideon, hoping to collect, material to put on our social media sites. And a fellow stopped us in the hall, a young man. He was CIA, he was undercover, but he had some elderly gentlemen with him. And he said, we're trying to get attention to these fellows from the National Security Leaders for America who are coming out to say, out of their comfort zone, to say how important it was that people realize what a threat he was to national security for our country and the world at large. We went into a studio, we taped these people, our mouths just dropped open at what they had to say, and then my son Gideon went into gear and found their point person. They're an organization of over 900 strong, I believe now is the number. We went down to Pennsylvania, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia. We met over 15 of them in their homes over 4 days. Driving here and there, my back went out, but it was worth it for America's democracy and the security of our country. And they were just extraordinary, moving beyond words, many of them in tears. They couldn't sit down. Many of them were Republicans who spent their whole lives never speaking out against the commander-in-chief, whether he was in power or out of power. But they feel that this is a crisis moment, an existential moment for the security of the country. Many of the cohorts gave their lives for, and they can't sit still.
Yeah. And Mandy, you said that your jaw dropped a few times. What were the biggest surprises that you heard?
That their emotionality, their passion and their emotionality, their patriotism, their love of this country, their concern for their fellow Republicans, and many of them are still Republicans, but they feel that they cannot, in good conscience, take a chance of putting Trump in the White House for 4 more years. They were in the position of seeing him in the White House before and what they did. I personally am very close friends with one of the highest people in national security of the country. And I said to him when we were shooting Homeland in 2016, you were, sort of okay with it now, and then things unfolded. And I said, how are you now? How do you feel now that he's in office? He said, now I'm really worried. I said, why is that? He said, because I've been with many of these president-elects and people running for president, and there's a big change that happens once they're in that chair in that White House, and I haven't seen that change, and that terrifies me.
Mandy, I know you're part of a group called Heroes for Harris. What's that all about?
I really don't know. It's just a bunch of guys who were I was in The Princess Bride, so we played, like superhero type characters. And they all got together. We've looked for every excuse possible to gather people in different arenas to raise money, raise funds, raise awareness. That was just one of the things. The Grateful Dead was another. There were several of them that we've all jumped on the bandwagon for. This is absolutely the most crucial moment that I've ever seen in the political life of my country for all of us. I want to just say, particularly to young people, I have it here. I believe the 50% of young people voted in 2020. There was 11% increase from 2016. We need to get that higher. Young people can make the difference. All kinds of people from every area of life, but young people, no excuse. register, get out to vote. Everyone knows somebody young. Make sure they all vote. It really is crucial, and it'll turn the nickel 100%.
Mandy Patinkin, thank you so very much. And I just want to once again underline, I'm such an admirer of your art and your aesthetic. I very much appreciate your time. I thank you for being with us, Mandy.
Thank you, and thank you all, and thank everyone listening for all that you've listened to during this election. Now is the crucial moment. Now, vote.